Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Nifty Ninty. I am your host, Matt Tuna Turner, and this is the podcast where we run down everything Nintendo every week. I've got another big show for you guys right now, including another game review and a lot of news to get to. But before we get to any of that, why don't we run down this week's new releases? Starting off this week's onslaught of digital releases is the flight adventure game Airmail. After that, we have Cubicolor, followed by a remaster of Luminous. The puzzle game that made its debut on the 3DS has come to the Switch. After that, we have another title called Angels of Death, one called Dream Alone, another called Figment, one called Fossil Hunters, another called Grave Danger. Another title that I am particularly excited for is Limbo, the very, very depressing platformer game that came out for the Xbox has finally come to Switch, and I am dying to dig into this one. We have another game called No Heroes Here, followed by Paranautical Activity. I guess that's like a ghost game at sea. Maybe they're pirates? I don't know. I'm going to have to check that out. We have another puzzle game called Photon Cube. There's a bunch of puzzle games this week. Last week we got The Journey Down. This week, The Journey Down Chapter 2. After that, Waking Violet, followed by the lone 3DS title, and this is for new 3DSs only, IFO. As usual, we got a few larger releases this week, including the Mario and Rabbids DK DLC. We also got a packaged version of The Blob. After that, we also have the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. All three Crash Bandicoot games on one cartridge. That sounds like a lot of fun. Followed by MotoGP 18 for all you racing fans. Another game that released this week is the action role-playing game Ys 3 Lacrimosa of Dana. This is a series I've been meaning to check out for a little while. I love a good role-playing game, and this is one of those series that's been around for a while. This was originally released on the Vita back in 2016 and has been released on the PS4 and now the Switch. So now that it's here, perhaps I should check it out. And of course, this game's biggest release is Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus. But before we get into that, another release this week that isn't really a game, but I felt should be mentioned because I think it's really cool. But Dark Horse and Nintendo have released the Legend of Zelda Encyclopedia. They've released two versions. One is the Deluxe Edition, and there's also the Normal Edition. Now, the Deluxe Edition looks just like the old NES cartridge. It comes in a sleeve, the book is gold, the pages are gold, I don't think real gold, and it's designed to look just like the original NES cartridge, which I think is so cool. It's full of neat little factoids, and the best part about it, it's actually reasonably priced. Alright, on to this week's biggest release, and that is Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus, which is the sequel to Wolfenstein: The New Order. This game comes to the Switch courtesy of the same people who brought us Doom. So you know that they know what they're doing, and hopefully, because this was an early title on PS4 and Xbox One, there wasn't a whole lot they had to leave out. The original game ran at 30 frames per second, as does the Nintendo Switch version, so there isn't much of a hit there in terms of frame rate. Once again, you play as Mr. Blazkowicz, and it is your job to take back America from those evil Nazi bad guys. I don't really want to give away any spoilers or anything, even though this is an older game and it is a port. It is new to the Nintendo Switch, and I don't think it's fair to those who haven't played it to spoil it, so I'll leave the story at that. I just wish that there was some online multiplayer in this game, but I shouldn't be surprised because the original didn't have it either. However, I think that a game like this is important to have on the Switch. Same with Doom and Skyrim, because in the past, Nintendo has had an issue getting third-party support for their consoles, and I'm so happy to see not just a mature title, but a third-party developer with Bethesda going so gung-ho on this. This is their third title now on the Switch, and fourth if you include Fallout Shelter. And I am just so pleased to see this, that alone is probably enough to make me want to buy this game. I've been deciding between this and Doom. I know that this one has a much better story than certainly Doom does, but there's a part of me that thinks maybe Quake could be coming soon, and I would love like a proper online competitive FPS on the Switch. But for now, I think maybe Wolf will do. Alright, wow, another jam-packed week on the Nintendo Switch, especially on the digital side of things. I didn't do a count, but that's roughly like 15 or 20 games this week. That's insane. So much coming all the time. It's really hard to keep track. I know that Nintendo is doing their best to update their store so that it makes games easier to find. Hopefully when the online service launches in September, we will get some updates for the store, things like user reviews or ratings, or maybe suggestive type of data mining, like where you buy something or a few of one type of game, so they recommend another one that you might not have heard of. So hopefully that's coming, because that store is full. It's full. Well, that's it for the games this week, so why don't we get on to this week's news. This week's leading story is kind of a continuation of something I mentioned last week. If you remember last week, I mentioned that Nintendo is bringing down the ban hammer hard on people who they believe are playing illegal games. Well, there's apparently a little more drama at that, as Nintendo has said that people who are not only playing illegal games but hacking their Switch will also receive the ban hammer. So those of you who are looking to hack or mod your Nintendo Switch, you will be banned from their online service. So you might want to think twice before doing that. Apparently they are very able to tell who has hacked their Switch and who hasn't. Moving right along, we have a little bit of news from a game that was announced a while ago. It was on Kickstarter, and for those of you who listen and are a little older, you'll probably remember the original of this game, and that is Toe Jam and Earl, Back in the Groove. It is finally set to release this fall, and the closed beta arrives next week. The original developers of the Toe Jam and Earl series have gone to Kickstarter, or I should say had gone to Kickstarter, to get funding for this game, and then they thought that Adult Swim would publish the game. However, that didn't end up happening. Adult Swim's release slate was too packed, so they decided to back out of that deal and are self-publishing. Now, if you remember, this will actually be the fourth in a series, as we got the original Toe Jam and Earl, and then back to Panic on Funkotron, and then Mission to Earth, and then finally this one. Now you're probably wondering why I'm mentioning this. Why would I mention an old Sega Genesis game? I really enjoyed this game. When it was released on the Virtual Console on the Wii, I was probably one of the first people to pick this up. It's such a weird and funky game. Go figure. Back to back in the groove. Panic on Funkotron. But it was so different. It wasn't like a platformer, but there was a lot of exploration, and you're kind of left to your own devices in this game. It was a lot of fun. So I'm happy to see that this game franchise is still going, and it is coming to the Switch this fall. Up next, we've got a couple of announcements regarding Nintendo Labo. So Nintendo will be doing a Labo contest in the next month, and the winner of this contest receives a Labo-themed Switch. So I believe the contest is the person who can make a musical instrument out of Nintendo Labo. And for the person who wins this contest, they get a Labo-themed Nintendo Switch. Now, that's not a Nintendo Switch made out of cardboard, because that would fall apart and would not be good. A little drop of water and your system is toast. It is a Nintendo Switch made to look like it is made out of cardboard, which I think is pretty cool. So whoever wins this, make sure you take lots of photos and post them online. In fact, if you happen to be listening, send me some photos and I'll make sure I add them to the podcast. The second piece of Labo news is Mario Kart 8 just recently got some Labo support. For those of you who bought the Labo Toy-Con, I think it's the called handles. It looks like the handlebars of a motorcycle. So for those of you who bought that Toy-Con, you can actually now put your Switch in there and your Joy-Cons and use it as a controller for Mario Kart. I don't imagine it works too well, but considering we got a plastic wheel, which kind of only worked okay and that sold pretty well, I think this is pretty cool. I think if you were to use the bikes, it might be a little cooler, but still, very cool idea from Nintendo. And a good use of Labo. If you happen to have the Labo, give it a shot. Couple tidbits of corporate news from Nintendo. Nintendo's newest president, Mr. Furukawa, has been recently put in place. He has replaced the outgoing president, and he is the 6th president of Nintendo ever. He is also the first president of Nintendo to grow up in the video game era. So hopefully we will see some really cool, new, innovative ideas out of this new president. The next little bit of corporate news from Nintendo is that Nintendo shares dropped 13% over this last week. Now, I'm not a financial guy, but that seems like a pretty significant drop. And when I was reading other articles around this, it would appear that I'm not the only one stumped by this. Apparently, financial analysts are pretty stumped by this. They don't really know what would cause Nintendo shares to drop 13% in 1 week. What caused this massive sell-off? They were speculating that maybe it was a weak showing at E3 or slow sales of Labo, but when you compare that to the sales of the Switch and not only their digital but also their packaged titles, they're doing pretty well. Maybe a slowdown of 3DS systems and titles, but I don't think that's anything new or exactly out of left field. So investors are scared for some reason, and no one's really sure why. But I mean, again, I'm not a financial guy, but maybe this is a good time to buy in a Nintendo stock. The biggest story for Nintendo Switch gamers this week came out of the Capcom camp, who have decided to double down on cloud-based gaming. Those of you lucky enough to live in Japan or in regions around it know that Resident Evil 7 was released earlier this year as a cloud-based game. It apparently has done well enough that Capcom is considering bringing other games to the Nintendo Switch via cloud-based streaming. I know there are many people out there that probably are looking forward to one game in particular that would come to Switch. Probably the only way it would come to Switch is via streaming from the cloud, and that is Monster Hunter World. They have not announced any titles that they would consider bringing to the Switch, just that they are considering more cloud-based game streaming. Now, personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this move. I think it's dangerous to gamers because we lose the ability to own our games, and when everything goes to the cloud, you get a subscription type of model, and you'll find your pocketbook lighter, and I just I don't like the idea that a publisher can decide what you get to play and what you don't get to play. To me, gaming is about freedom and it's about choice. Also, I'm a collector, so I like to have the physical product if possible. I know that's not always possible. Like for instance, Ikaruga or Banner Saga, not gonna be able to buy the physical disc or cartridge of that. So you get them digitally. But it just the subscription thing, it really irks me. For music or movies, it's okay. But for gaming, I'm not sure. Not only that, but for gaming, especially on a hybrid portable console, you need to have a persistent internet connection. And I know in the West, that's not always possible. You can't bring Resident Evil 7 with you on the go. You're stuck playing it at home, which for some people is okay. And I think for games like Monster Hunter that wouldn't otherwise be able to come to the Switch, this is a good compromise. But I just think this is a very dangerous, dangerous slope that we're starting to broach here. And I feel that we as gamers are going to suffer when publishers do decide to go all in. If you remember at E3, I think EA mentioned that they're looking to do more game streaming. And I've heard rumors that Microsoft is as well. And I think this is bad news. Anyways, what do you guys think? That's just my opinion. If you guys think it's a great idea, why don't you let me know in the comments below. Also, you know what I'll do? I'll put a poll up on my Twitter page at NiftyNinty if you don't already follow me. And let me know there what you guys think. Do you like cloud-based gaming? Do you not? I'll look forward to reading your results. Alright, now just before we get to this week's review, this is normally where I would be asking questions, or taking questions rather, from you guys, the audience. For those of you that wish to ask me questions, leave them in the comments below or find me on Twitter. But as I haven't really received any questions from anyone, I figure that for now this would be a good place for kind of a general discussion of things. The first topic for this, I was thinking, would be Splatfests. How many people out there are playing Splatoon right now? I know I do. How many people are consistently playing Splatoon 2? I'm not one of those people. That's why I think the Splatfests are great. This past weekend we got Team Pulp versus No Pulp. Team Pulp, by the way, for those of you that might be interested. And I think what the Splatoon folks have done is great with this. Not only did it coincide with the DLC, which was smart, get people back in the game, get a Splatfest going, but like, I think this is great to keep people coming back. Like I said, I don't often play Splatoon. It's not a go-to game for me. I do enjoy it. It's a lot of fun, and in terms of competitive online game, this is one of the best ones you could get outside of like a Mario Kart, I guess. But these Splatfests, they keep me coming back. I don't play a lot of Splatoon. I'm decent at it. I don't play a lot, but I keep coming back for these Splatfests. And I was just curious, how many of you do the same? Do you just put the game away, wait for a Splatfest, and then play? Or are you actually actively playing Splatoon 2 every week, every day? Why don't you let me know? If you do, or if you're like me and you really only play Splatfests, let me know. It would be great to maybe squad up with you. We could take down Team No Pulp together, or whoever comes down the road. When it comes to Splatfest 2, do you guys actually... Because I know there are a few of you out there that will just... I don't want to say main, but you'll just automatically choose whichever one the host happens to be a fan of, or I should say that your favorite host happens to be a fan of. Personally, I don't do that. I go with the option that I feel I like the most. But yeah, so the gist is really enjoying the Splatfests, and I'll put another poll up on my Twitter page to see how many of you like them, don't like them, only play them, or perhaps are always playing Splatoon 2. I know there is quite a competitive scene for that game. Now, the next topic I wanted to discuss is actually something I stole from Kotaku. I read a lot of blogs, news, watch a lot of videos about video games, whether that be Nintendo or otherwise, just because this is a passion of mine. I really like this industry. I've always been a gamer. I've always had a place in my heart for Nintendo. So I follow the industry closely. I read a lot, and I came across an article on Kotaku. It got me thinking about my own play habits, and I was curious to know what your guys's are. Basically, the article was that in today's gaming landscape, do you actually finish your games? Or do you get bored before the end and walk away? And not only bored, but this article touches on something I hadn't actually thought of, especially in the landscape of games like Breath of the Wild or Skyrim, where you have these open world games that seemingly go on forever. So maybe it's not just boredom, but is there a fear of finishing games? Like when you get to the end, you're just like, Oh, that's it. Now what do I do? Personally, I like to beat my games. I used to be a completionist. I used to have to 100% everything, but now there's just too many games to do that for. And games like Breath of the Wild or Mass Effect or Far Cry or whatever, I used to actually avoid just because they were too big and I knew it would take too long to get to the end of them. However, Breath of the Wild I absolutely love and I still play to this day. But do I finish my games? Yes. Most definitely yes. I like to finish my games. What about you guys? Do you guys like to finish your games? Or like the person who wrote the article on Kotaku? Do you get bored and walk away? Do you have a fear of completing your games? Are you a completionist? Do you have to 100% everything? Or is there really only one game you play and nothing else? Like, do you only play Fortnite? Do you only play Battlefield or Battlefront? But for me, because I like these stories so much, I get involved in them. I want to see where they go. I want to see the characters grow and evolve, change, fall from grace, whatever it may be. I want to see how these characters' stories end. And I think that's why I gravitate so much towards RPGs as opposed to an FPS or, a racing game. The point of this topic was, do you finish your games? So do you? Why don't you guys let me know in the comments below whether or not you finish your games. And again, I'll also put a poll up on my Twitter page at NiftyNinty for those of you that don't follow me already. And let me know what your play habits are, because I'm curious. I know that the person that wrote this article isn't alone. I know that. There are people out there who get bored of a game and just say, poof, on to the next one. It has happened to me, but that's generally because it's been kind of a bad game anyways. So why don't you guys let me know? I'm curious. Alright, we got another game review for you guys this week. I hope you enjoy it. This week I will be reviewing Ikaruga, which you can find on the Nintendo Switch eShop. Ikaruga, a somewhat non-traditional bullet hell game, originally developed in 2001 by Treasure for Japanese arcades. It was ported to the Dreamcast in Japan in 2002. Upon initial release, it was met with mixed reviews. Treasure felt that consumers who were expecting a Twitch shooter found the game's puzzle elements off-putting. After being ported to the Dreamcast, it received cult status, as importers tried to get their hands on it. Those of you that remember the Dreamcast was discontinued at this point, and a year later, Ikaruga made its debut in the West on the Nintendo GameCube. Since then, it's been on almost every console, and most recently, the Nintendo Switch, which is what I've been playing it on and used for this review. Ikaruga plays like most shmups, but with a very different and challenging mechanic. In Ikaruga, you don't pick up power-ups or different weapon types. Instead, your ship, called the Ikaruga, can switch polarities. The ability to switch between the white and black polarities sounds simple, but it adds a very complex puzzle element to the game. The enemies either shoot white or black bullets, and you switch between the polarities in order to absorb the bullets of the corresponding colors. If you are on the opposite polarity, your ship, however, is destroyed. If you're on the same polarity, you will absorb the bullet's energy. You use that absorbed energy to unleash a massive homing blast. Of course, if you are destroyed, you need to reabsorb all that energy. There is also an advantage to using the opposite polarity of the enemy ship. If you are on a black polarity and the enemy is white, you will do double the damage to the enemy. Of course, the trade-off is you are incredibly vulnerable. Ikaruga features 3 different game modes, with a 4th you can choose to unlock right off the bat, or wait until you finish the game's 5 unapologetically difficult levels. I chose the latter. Big mistake. The main game mode is the arcade mode, which can be played solo or with a friend. Arcade mode can be played on 3 different difficulty settings. I would reserve hard mode for very seasoned players. Once you beat the levels in arcade mode, you are actually able to select those levels in Chapter Select. There are lots of options to try and make the game a little easier. You can even add infinite continues, for example. But doing so will make you unable to save and upload your scores to the online leaderboards. Sadly, the online leaderboards are really the only online functionality of this game. There is no online multiplayer, which I feel is a missed opportunity. However, there is local multiplayer. You can use two switches or share one. The controls for Ikaruga are pretty basic. There are no crazy button combos. You use the stick to move the ship around the screen. One button is the shoot button, which you just hold down. Another button changes the polarity of the ship, allowing you to switch between white and black polarities, and a third button to fire the homing laser, which can only be done once the power gauge is full. The nice thing about the Switch version is the controls are customizable. I didn't like the way the default controls felt, so I remapped the buttons to the shoulder buttons, which made it much easier to play. The story is pretty inconsequential. It's a shmup. You want to hop in your fighter and blow things up. For those of you that must know, though, Ikaruga takes place 7 years after one of the most powerful men on the island of Harai discovered a magical power buried deep underground that gave him godlike strength. A rebel federation rose to meet and defeat this man, but were beaten time and time again. The federation was almost completely wiped out except for one pilot, named Shinra. He set off to defeat this evil man. Sadly, he was shot down and landed in a remote village called Ikaruga. The village's inhabitants, people who were lost during the war, nursed Shinra back to health. Once healthy, Shinra was determined to continue the fight. Luckily for him, the villagers of Ikaruga had been building a ship, which they kept safe and hidden underground. They entrusted Shinra with their ship, the Ikaruga, which had the ability to switch between white and black polarities. With this new ship, Shinra took off to continue the fight. The folks at Nicholas have done an excellent job of preserving the arcade feel of this game, especially on the Switch, which you can actually turn on its side and play the game vertically. Finding a way to prop up the Switch is probably the biggest issue with that. The music in the game is fast and keeps the blood pumping and complements the tone of the game perfectly. I'm not sure if the game has been reskinned or up-resed at all, but the graphics are amazing. I played in handheld mode and the game was smooth, even played horizontally. It is easy to see the insane amount of hazards flying towards you. When docked or played horizontally, your score and other important information is displayed in the area around the action, so the screen isn't super cluttered. Now the question is, does this game still hold up? Yes, emphatically yes. For a game that is pushing 20 years old, it still plays and feels great. The Switch version benefits from the ability to play in vertical mode, to give that true arcade bullet hell experience. The punishing difficulty is also fresh in an age where more and more games like to hold the user's hands. I first played this game on the GameCube back in 2004 and it still feels the exact same. So, the final verdict for Ikaruga. In terms of gameplay, I give it an 8. The controls, although basic, are completely customizable, so I gave it a 9. Story, not all that important, so I gave it a 7. Presentation of this game was absolutely phenomenal. I really enjoyed it. I felt that it was the right mix of new and old, so it gets a 9. And the final category, since this is a retro game, does it still hold up today? As I mentioned, yes, it certainly does. So I gave that a 9. That means Ikaruga gets a total score of 8.4. I wish it would have been a little higher, but sadly the story brought it down just a little bit. Alright, and that's it for another episode of Nifty Ninty. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to this. I hope you enjoyed the review of Ikaruga. It was a lot of fun playing this one for you guys, and I've already started playing another game for next week. You'll find out then what that is going to be. I hope you enjoy it. Just before I sign off here, as I mentioned last week, there will be a rebrand coming to this channel. Some things have happened, some things are happening, so stay tuned for that. I am a one-man show, so it is very hard for me to create content as well as get things ready for the rebrand, so be patient, it's coming. I think it'll be really cool and you guys will really enjoy it. So as always, this is a one-man show. I'm the only person producing this content. I have no help from anybody, so it would mean the world to me if you could please sign up for my Patreon, or at the very least hit that subscribe button below. Also, if you really want to get a hold of me, the comments below are great. I love reading feedback, good, bad, otherwise, doesn't matter. Let me have it. But if you really want to get a hold of me, Twitter is the best way to get a hold of me. You can find me at NiftyNinty on Twitter or on Patreon, patreon.com/NiftyNinty. And as always, please hit that subscribe button. I'll see you all next week. Stay nifty.